So first of all, Susan, congratulations on the film. It's a really beautiful, heartwarming Christmas film. So let's talk about how you got involved in the project first.
Well, the producer, Robert Michelson, brought me this nonfiction book by Les Standiford, which is the true story of what happened. And I was so interested in the story, it felt so modern and so surprising that I was really instantly hooked and thought it would be a great movie.
That's amazing. What sort of research did you do?
Well, in addition to the book, I think I'm a little addicted to research. So I read a few more biographies and I read books about Victorian London because I just really like to inhabit the world. Somehow I find it easier to write about if I can really sort of put myself there. So I did a lot of research.
What was the most interesting thing you found out about Charles Dickens or even about Christmas traditions back then?
The thing that really intrigued me about Dickens is that he was the first literary rock star. And he really was. When he went to America, it was like the British invasion of the 60s. People wanted to know everything about him. And they wanted to clip little locks of his hair, and they wanted to know what he had for breakfast. And it was a completely unprecedented phenomenon. And he was a massive bestseller. I guess you'd think like J.K. Rowling kind of level of success. So, and he was only 31 when he wrote A Christmas Carol. He was very young, he was very attractive, and still making his way in the world. So that was one of the things. About it, to do with Christmas, the point in a way of the book and the movie is that there wasn't really Christmas the way we think of it. It had become a very minor holiday. It didn't have a lot of significance. And it really was largely because of this book that the holiday became what we think of today as something, especially in the sense of a time for giving back, a time for thinking of those less fortunate. So
That's very interesting. I didn't know about that before watching the movie.
Yeah.
I really like the concept of Charles conversing with his own characters. It was so interesting to watch that. So how did you land on that structure for the story?
Well, that is based on something I came across about Dickens himself, which is that he could have been an actor, really. And he used to either act out all the parts, or he would act with imaginary characters. And his daughter recalls watching him get up and perform these scenes. So it's kind of based on fact. We're just seeing the world through his eyes.
Interesting. Dan Stevens is so expressive with his eyes, with his facial expressions. He immediately grabs our attention. So what sort of conversations, if at all, did you have with him about Dickens?
Well, I didn't have them, and the director would have had them, but what I think is so extraordinary about his performance that he seems to have intuited is that Dickens was a very theatrical character. I mean, I think you would know if he was in the room. He loved to perform, he loved to charm, and I think he's captured that side of him, and also the very interior, personal, private side, when, the kind of the things he was struggling with. So I love that about his performance.
And there are some fictional elements added to the story, so to the movie. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, the fictional elements, of course, are him having to struggle with Scrooge about which direction the story should go. There's no evidence that actually happened, but it might have happened. That the character kind of had a life of his own and a mind of his own about which way the story should be told. And given that he really did think his characters sort of came to life and had their own opinions, it's not so far stretch, I like to think.
Did you feel any pressure to write the story behind the story?
To write the story behind the story?
To write the story about how the Christmas Carol actually
Well,
took
of
place.
course, it's a little cheeky to write a story about Charles Dickens, because I know there are a lot of scholars out there who might take offense. But we actually talked to a lot of scholars and said, is this kind of within the realm of possibility? So I feel we tried to cover our bases that way.
What was the biggest challenge for you when you're writing this?
Well, it took a long time to get the story right, because there's a lot of elements. We're dealing with Charles Dickens at a time of his life when he's really reassessing his whole life, much the way Scrooge did in the book. And trying to get that right, there's a whole story involving his father, involving his sister, so trying to get the balance right between what was happening in his real life and what was happening in his fantasy life, which is a writer's life, basically.
What was it like when you've seen the film after writing it and the whole thing taking place together?
I don't think there's anything more magical than seeing something come to life that you have created up in your little office while you're up there in your pajamas writing away, and then to step onto the set or to see it on the big screen, because a whole army of people have come and they've all put their contributions in, and it's really magical. It's like a dream.
I definitely had a few favorite scenes, but I would like to know what's your favorite scene in the film.
I think maybe the moment, because this is something that was based on something we found, is that, you know, Dickens is famous for the names of his characters, and they're so extraordinary, we almost sort of think of them as a category on this own. And apparently he used to collect names, because he said at one point, if you get the name right, the character will appear.
Yeah.
And my favorite, I think, scene is when he comes up with Scrooge's name, finally hits on what the name should be, and then Scrooge appears in his study.
That's amazing. And lastly, what's next for you?
Oh, well, actually I'm working on, years ago, I wrote a TV series called Slings and Arrows, which had quite a success here and also in the U.S. And for years, the co-creators, Bob Martin and Mark McKinney, and I have been working on an idea, and we're hoping that we're going to get it off the ground this year, a kind of prequel to that show.
Oh. Thank you so much, Susan, for chatting with us, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much.